This is the Kitsune clan, a group of sword enthusiasts who like cosplay, reenactment, and historical martial arts. If you have similar interests, feel welcomed. At a certain point in your life, you buy a sword. And if you haven't, you should really reconsider your life choices. Problem is, as soon as you buy one sword, you are likely to buy another one. And maybe you meet a certain girl in your life and you choose to marry, and maybe you don't exchange rings but swords. At least we did. And then for training, you buy polypropylene swords because you cannot train everything with steel swords. For example, if they drop, they will ruin your floor, which is much nicer with these plastic thingies. And then you recognize there are so many different cool types of swords, so you buy more of them and more of them. And maybe one day you have kids, and with kids you need to be careful, so you start to buy LARP swords because they are softer and less dangerous, and so you can play with your kids with swords from an early age on. And then you start to watch anime and read manga, and you recognize, hey, there are cool weapons in there, and you can buy them in a kind of LARPish style, but not entirely. And so you buy stuff like that, and more like that because you start the next manga and the next anime, and they also have cool swords. What you have in the end is a whole bunch of swords. And now the question arises, where do you put all these swords? Of course, you can often see people having their swords hanging on their walls, but I need my walls for my small dojo, otherwise we cannot train. So we store them in racks, like you see that also in museums. The problem is the racks in museums are horribly expensive. So what we mostly use are racks that are thought for wine bottles. They come in small packages, usually 4 of them, and then you can simply stack them on top of each other. And we have simply stacked 19 of them that reaches the ceiling and therefore is fixed immediately. As you can see, there's a second set of 19 racks stacked onto each other that is perpendicular to the first set, and therefore we can store swords from the front and from the side in this combined rack. In addition, we store the really long pole arms and the lightsabers in an additional rack that is used by anglers for their rods. Works quite well and safely. We will still see that the shields are not well stored where they are currently, but I have no better solution at the moment. So the racks save all that stuff away from the mat area, which allows us a normal training next to all the equipment, but it's easily accessible when necessary. As you can see, there's also a certain distance to the mat area, so you will not fall directly against the rack, usually. Especially when training with longer weapons and more people, you might still hit the rack, but the weapons are stored deep inside, they will not fall out, and the racks are rather cheap, so if we would damage something, the damage is not so costly. As we will see in a moment, the swords are relatively well accessible when necessary. Not perfectly yet, we are still working on that. But we will also come to the point why there are so many of these swords. Because of the weight distribution, we store all the steel weapons, which are the heaviest ones, in the lowermost areas of the rack. These are all the blunt steel weapons. The sharp ones for cutting are stored not close to the mat because that's not where they're usually used. Many martial arts don't train with steel weapons. That has several reasons, but some of them might be that people are afraid of training with steel. From our experience, there is nothing to be afraid of, and you gain a lot from steel weapons because they are the closest thing that you can have to the original. For example, for training edge alignment, nothing is better than training with steel. Also, for getting an idea about weight, balance, weight distribution, and in general how these weapons behave, steel is basically unavoidable. Many practitioners, in addition, wear a lot of protective gear. That's fine, it depends what you want to learn with it. Historically, there's a lot of fighting with steel weapons without any armor, and for understanding this aspect, you definitely should also not use too much protective gear because the gear will force you to move in a certain way. With the gear, you can get a bit more competitive, and that can also get you closer to the real historical aspect. But as said, there will be certain caveats tied to the protective gear. So I think it's a good idea to do both, train with gear and without. The same is probably true for the next category of swords, the polypropylene swords. I really like these ones. When they came out, they were a big step forward because they basically substituted the former wooden weapons. With wood and polypropylene, you can train certain things that you do not dare with the steel weapons, like some of the more spectacular disarms, and also throwing techniques and the like feel much better with the polypropylene or wood stuff than it was with the metal. Polypropylene and wood also don't produce these little tiny metal pieces that steel weapons shear off that you might get into your eyes, or at least you step on it when you train barefoot and it really hurts. On the other hand, wood and polypropylene weapons are close to the real weight distribution and balance to the steel weapons, and are therefore a really good substitute for training specific aspects. The advantage of the polypropylene weapons over the wood weapons, in addition, is they don't break. The old red oak bokken, so katana substitutes, tended to break under too much pressure, and they became horribly sharp weapons after breaking. That was a really dangerous time, and so I'm really happy that we now have a substitute that can do all that wood could do before without having the danger of producing these horrible accidents. Yet there are still a lot of wood weapons in use, and it makes absolute sense. For example, for Eskrima Kali Arnis styles, the rattan type of sticks are not replaceable by any type of plastic sticks. I've tried a lot of them, and nothing comes close to the rattan sticks. In addition, I have quite some more wood weapons because you don't get everything as polypropylene. Although the market is already quite good, including also Indian weapons, crazy Chinese weapons, medieval weapons, ancient weapons, some things you only get in wood, like nodachis are really tricky to get in plastic. Yes, in the US, but not easily shipping to Europe, for example. Even among the rattan sticks, there's still quite some variation. There's softer type of rattan that will easier, not break, but bend. There's hardened rattan that is really hard to break and where pieces might chip off, but not in a bad way like with the red oak. And so you even have variation in these types of training weapons. For longer sticks, like the Jo or the Rokushakubo, so more or less quarter staff length, there has been a lot of rattan on the market, and these are really good. But now there's also polypropylene coming in for this length, and they are quite comparable concerning durability and flexibility. So there's now an option for going for wood and for going for plastic here. I still think wood weapons will not disappear entirely because they have some advantages. Even more advantages will come with the last category we go through, the padded weapons. but we also have quite some disadvantages with these. Many padded weapons are based on the other categories by simply adding something on top. Others, like LARP weapons or cosplay weapons, are made from foamy or rubbery stuff and have no strong core, or at least they shouldn't have a too strong core. They usually have something like glass fiber cores. The padding has, of course, the advantage that you cannot hurt your training partner that easily, but it comes at a lot of costs. Either the weapons are too light or they are too bulky. Many LARP weapons are in fact both too light and too bulky. If we look here at the cosplay weapons, they are usually much closer in shape to a real weapon, but are also definitely too light. As you can see with the examples we're using here, due to the foamy nature of some of the protruding structures, these tend to shear off after some time of training, and you will crush some padded weapons over time, but that's part of the game. A big plus of the brightly colored cosplay weapons is, if you train outside in your neighborhood, most people will not complain, while if you run around with steel swords, there might be a policeman coming by and asking what you are doing there, depending on your neighborhood. So for a better acceptance of the sword community by the society, these brightly colored training swords definitely have an advantage. Lastly, if you are training on weekends, the padded weapons make less noise and don't disturb the neighborhood as well. Hope we gave you some inspiration. See you around next time.